Hello and welcome to today's video. Today we're going to talk about an incredible book called the Shahnameh. This is a Persian book. This is a Persian book and it's the soul of Persian literature. This book is from the 1100s, so it's nearly 1,000 years old, but it's still very relevant today. And this book, it has it all. It has father killing sons, sons killing fathers. It has family dynasties, it has kings, it has warriors. It's very Game of Thrones like, but it's also incredibly deep. This book is not only an epic, it's not about fantasy and kings. It's a book about the whole civilization, the Persian civilization. And today we're going to go through it very deeply. We're going to analyze it, analyze some of its history, its themes, its character, and of course we have to give background on both the book and the writer Ferdowsi. Now, the title Shahnameh means the Book of Kings. Shah means king in Persian, and this book tells the story of one king after the next, after the next, after the next. So it's a generational book. It's about how the civilization rises and falls, how heroes rises and falls, and in the end you see that everyone dies. Everyone dies in the end, but this book shows how civilizations live on in the memory and in storytelling, and how heroes lives on in the memory and storytelling. And it has a very deep philosophy about how humans strive even though we're going to die, and how that's very important. This book is very predeterminist, meaning that it focuses very heavily that your fate is determined by your birth. But with all this we're going to go through today, so excited to go through this gigantic 1,000-page book, which is one of the most ancient books and one of the most important books in Persian literature. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Persian literature, it's very important to give a bit of context to both Shahnameh, the writer, and the book itself. So let's start with the writer, Ferdowsi. He was born around and lived around year 1000 in northeastern Iran. He was born in a city called Tas, and he lived in a very special period in Persian history because Persia is one of the oldest civilizations in the whole world. But at this time, it was conquered by the Arabs. Persia was under Arab conquest, and the Persian language was in danger. It was in danger of dying out. A lot of people had started to speak Arabic. Also, Persia was not an Islamic country, so it became an Islamic country during the Arab conquest, and all of its pre-Islamic history was about to die out. And Ferdowsi himself, he was not anti-Islam, he was not nationalist, and he didn't want to restore paganism or the religions before Islam. But this book is all about preserving history and preserving language. This gigantic book, nearly 1,000 pages, is often credited for saving the Persian language, meaning that Persian as a language exists today only because of this book, because this writer kept the Persian language alive through this book. And not only the Persian language, but this book is all about pre-Islamic history, meaning that he kept alive the stories of the past, the stories of the civilizations before the Arab conquest. So this book is all about, even though all civilizations rise and falls, kings rise and falls, how their stories live through storytelling, how they don't die out, how heroes don't die out, and how civilizations don't die out. So this context is super important. And a little bit about the book itself is that it preserves Persian culture and identity, and that's why it's so important. You see a lot of Persian in there, everything from saffron and pomegranates to more cultural rituals to more stories from pre-Islam. As I said, all set in pre-Islamic Persia, and you even see the previous religion, meaning Zoroastrianism, and Ahriman, the devil in that religion, is a central character in here. So it's set in pre-Islamic Persia, and it does not criticize Islam, but it tries to preserve those traditions, those cultures, and it preserves it from dying out during this very special time period. And in Iran, this book is super popular. They often tell stories from this book in cafes. They have a lot of plays and theater plays of the stories in these books. There are TV series even. So this is the cornerstone and the soul of Persian literature, as it has had a gigantic impact on even Persian history. Let's talk a little bit about the plot in Shahnameh. Later we're going to take and look deeper into some of the more specific stories, the most famous and important stories in this book. But the plot itself is that it goes through each history of each king, from King Zahak to King Shamshid to King this king. So It's a 1,000-page book that goes through king to king to king, and it can roughly be divided into 3 parts. So the first part is the mythological part. Here we are in the beginning of history itself. Things are very mythological, they're very ancient, there's very grandeur, and it's very far back in time. And after that you have the second part, which is the age of heroism. Here you have grand kings, you have heroes, and the most important character in Shahnameh, Rustam, the big hero of Persia, is placed in this time period. And lastly you have the historical age. This one is much more realistic, and as you can see, the further down the book you progress, the more the grandeur falls apart, the more the characters becomes realistic, the kings become corrupt, the warriors are not that much hero-like, they have their flaws, they do bad things. So Rustam was nearly flawless, while the last hero, Chubina, wants to take the throne for himself, which is a gigantic no-no. So you see that in this book, and this actually goes to one of the more important themes in this book too, that civilizations, they fall apart, they go downwards. Every civilization have to have down periods and up periods, but that through storytelling, the stories live on. And when it comes to the king, a very important aspect here is that this book believes very strongly in predeterminism. Often before the child is born, the king is born, or the hero is born, astrologers come together and they say that this person is going to do big things, or this person is going to be horrible, and then that thing always happens. So this book is a very big believer in predeterminism. It's a very big believer in classes, that the kings are to be separate from the other classes, from the heroes, from the warriors, that are separate from the common people. So it's a very strong belief that classes should exist, and if you remove classes, the whole society would collapse into chaos. So it's a very different way of thinking than today. And there's also this word, a very special Persian word that is used in this book called far. And this also goes to show that it's your lineage, your bloodline, that determines if you're great or not. And it also has a very special view on women, as women here often falls in love, they often marry, and their purpose is to give children. So it's a very old school stories about kings and the things they do, what makes them great, their wars, that they build bridges, that they build cities. What do they do? What is the good and the bad things they do? And this book is very black and white, meaning that you have evil and corruption, and you have good. And the good always fights the evil and wins. So it's a very interesting book, and it's not a religious book, but it can be compared that it has a story that are trying to show something that is bad or something that is good. Like Rustam, when it fights a dragon, it shows courage, which is a good thing, while corruptions always leads to horrible things, which is to show that, oh, that's a negative thing. So the stories always also have a moral message. Now, let's talk about the central theme in Shahnameh, because you're probably wondering, if this book is a collection of stories from kings to kings to kings, does it have a red line? What is Ferdowsi, the writer, trying to tell us? What is the great message here? So, as I said previously, this book is predeterminist, meaning that people are born with a fate. So some people are born to greatness. Some heroes are born to greatness. Some kings are born to greatness. And it all depends on your blood lineage. If you have a bad father, you are at risk at becoming bad. If you're not born from a bloodline of kings, you're not worthy of the throne. So it's very predeterminist, it's very classist, you can say. But the central theme here is that every hero, every king, all civilizations, in the end, everyone dies, thing goes up, thing goes down, everything has a downturn. So no hero can live forever. Even Rustam, the big hero in Shahnameh, even he dies in the end. The greatest kings die in the end. And this book, in a way, asks the question, why do humans strive for greatness? If your fate is predetermined, what is the point of trying to strive? Why work hard? Why try to achieve things? And this is the big point of this book, is that even though every grand thing in the end ends, the story lives on through storytelling, and that's the main purpose of this book. Again, because of the background with the Arab invasion, that he wanted to preserve the culture, it's trying to preserve the culture by saying that it's very important to carry on these stories. That's what makes humans great. And it's also trying to say that morality is very important, that it's in our human nature to strive for greatness, even though everyone is going to die in the end. It's definitely not a nihilistic book, because It's saying that humans definitely strive for greatness, and that's our purpose, gives our lives meaning, that's grandeur, and also that the story will live on. The story of what we did, what we achieved, will live on in the end. So mortality, the fact that we all are going to die, will actually make human sacrifices and our effort actually more meaningful in a way. Now, there are too many characters to go through each one of them in this book, Shahnameh, but there's especially one that we have to talk about, and that is Rustam, the great warrior, the great hero of this book, and it's probably the majority of people's favorite. Now, he symbolizes strength. He's a warrior, so he's very stoic. He goes to war, he wins war after war after war. He meets a lot of challenges. He fights a dragon and wins. He goes and fights this big devil, and he actually comes out winning. So it's the big warrior champion of this book, and it's very fun to read his stories, fighting great. And the most important story is probably him fighting his own son, Sohrab. Now, he didn't know that that was his son, and it shows predeterminism, because his son is said to be an incredibly great warrior because he carries his lineage from his father. So he was determined to be a great warrior from the beginning. But they meet on the battlefield. One is fighting for Persia, another for the other country, Turan, which is where his mother comes from. He doesn't know that that's his father. The father doesn't know that that's his son. And they fight. And it ends up with Rustam killing his own son. And this is one of the most tragic stories in this entire book. It's one of the most famous ones. And it actually has a very deep meaning. So the writer Ferdowsi tries to tell us here that the old generation destroys the future generation. Because Sohrab represents the future generations, he represents young energy, limitless possibility. But this shows that the old generation, they transfer the trauma and the problems onto the younger generation, and that destroys the younger generation. And it's not even the only story about a father killing his son in Shahnameh. There's a lot of stories about father killing sons and about sons killing fathers. And Ferdowsi is trying to say here that lineage lead to immortality, that you cannot be immortal through your lineage, because the fate of your sons or the fate can be very different than from the father. And in the old days this was a normal belief, but Ferdowsi is here trying to say that lineage cannot last forever. But the only thing that stores is storytelling, that the stories of the persons that lived become famous. That the stories of the persons that lived, the stories lives on. And in the end, Rustam himself ended up dying and being killed, even though he seemed invincible, that no one could beat him. And again, that's Ferdowsi's way to say that all heroes, they come to an end, that the greatness, the grandeur comes to an end. Now, another very famous story from Shahnameh is the character of Afrasiab and Turan, the country of Turan. So you have the country of Persia, which is what this book is about, and you have the country of Turan, which is around Central Asia today. And they have a generational war that lasts several kings. And Afrasiab is the king in Turan, and he's seen as evil and bad. And it's very interesting because Ferdowsi is here trying to say that history is a generational memory, that historical trauma, it passes from generation to generation to generation. Because in the beginning, the story is that both Turan and Persia was part of the same country, but this king gave one son the leadership of Persia and another son the leadership of Turan. So the leadership comes from the same family, but because of history and because of war, it becomes a civilizational rivalry that lasts generations. But in the end, it also shows that all civilization collapses, because in the end, the conflict between Persia and Turan, it ends. There's a lot of intermarriage, which shows that enemies suddenly can become family, and the borders can become erased. But it's the story of the people that lives on. A lot of the stories of these kings also contain smaller moral stories, smaller moral themes in them. So, for example, there are tales of great kings like Bayramgur, Sekandar, Esfandiar. And what all this has in common is that they're moral, they're just, and they do not let arrogance and pride corrupt them. A central theme about bad kings is that they let negative qualities like pride, like ego, corrupt them. And this book is trying to tell through the stories that those things are bad. So a very good example about that is in the beginning, the story of the king Jamshid. In the beginning, He's described as this great king that does a lot of great things, but in the end his own pride corrupts them and the civilization start to decay. Another is the horrible king Zahak. He is described as the demon king, as this evil king, and it's because he lets pride, he lets ego, he lets all these different negative qualities influence him. And it always shows in this book that the good always beats the evil. So it shows that greatness, even people that are born for greatness, can become corrupted, and it can become evil if they're not moral, if they do not do the moral correct thing. Now, another central theme in this book is the role of masculinity. So this book can be described as having like a warrior culture, like being very stoic. The heroes, like Rustam, they are very isolationist, they repress their emotions, they have an inability to recognize loved ones, they are violent, you could say, especially in war. So this book promotes masculinity and promotes a kind of warrior culture when it comes to women. When it comes to women in this book, it's a very patriarchal system. Women have their place, and if they go outside this place, horrible things happens. Women, it's a very aristocratic marriage system where women are married away, and it's often their father that decides if that's okay or not. When it comes to women, this book is criticized because it's a very male-dominated system. Even though there are some stories in this book about very intelligent and smart women that do very intelligent choices inside this patriarchal system, like Tamina or Rudaba, that are both are described as very intelligent. They do give very good advice, and they're very described as having very smart emotional intelligence that the male warriors don't have, simply. You're probably now wondering, how did this book survive during the Arab invasion? I mean, what is the relationship between this book and Islam, for example? So this book doesn't mention Islam at all. It's all placed in the time before the Arab invasion, before Persia became Islamic. So Christianity is mentioned in this book, Indian religions are mentioned in this book, and all the Persian kings, they have the previous religion, the Zoroastrianism or fire worshipping. They all believe in Ahriman as Satan that tries to influence people to do bad things. They believe in devils. But this book is not a criticism of Islam, and it does not actually go against Islam. There are a lot of similar ideas here, like pride is bad, ego is bad. Those kinds of moral stories actually correlate very well with Islam. And there's some things that are very different. In Islam, everyone is spiritually equal. In this book, lineage is very important. It's a very aristocratic system with different classes. It's very predeterminist, meaning that you're born with a very specific fate, and all the characters actually fulfill that specific fate. But all in all, it does not go against Islam. It's not a criticism against Islam. The main point of this book, the main point of Ferdowsi, was to keep the Persian language alive in a time period where it was threatened to be taken over by Arabic. And the main point was to keep the stories of pre-Islamic Persia from disappearing. His point was to keep those stories alive, keep the heroes alive. He wanted to preserve the culture and the history about the culture through this book and through the writing. So if you're wondering what the main point of this book is, it's preserving history. There's a lot of different stories about different kings in this book. They have different moral stories and themes inside them, and the main theme of this entire book is to keep Persian history and culture alive. That's the red line through this book. So in a time period where it was threatened to be erased from history, this book wants to say that it has a very cyclical view of history. Civilizations arises, greatness arises, it corrupts itself, it falls apart, it's conquered, then it arises again, greatness arises again. Heroes arise, they die, heroes arise, they die. So this book is trying to say that we are immortal, but the story lives on. The story of all the different people, of all the different society, they live on through storytelling. And the purpose of this book is to be the storytelling mechanism. This book is not nihilistic in any way. It's actually kind of the opposite. It tries to say that human effort and striveness is a very beautiful thing, and it will live on forever through storytelling. Now, we come to a very important section, which is, why is this book still relevant? It was rewritten in around year 1000, so it's a very, very old book, and it's a very big book. So why should you read this book? Why does this book matter? Why does the philosophy matter? So this book has gotten a lot of criticism in modern times, mostly because it's fatalist. It believes that lineage is very important, believes that your fate is determined by birth, so you have a predetermined fate and a predetermined life course. It believes in aristocracy, that it believes in different classes. It believes in patriarchy. It glorifies violence. So why is this book important? Now, this book is very important for Persians because the Persian language exists only because of this book. It preserved the Persian language. It's seen as a point of national pride. It keeps alive the Persian tradition that existed in pre-Islamic history, especially in today's Iran, where the Islamic government is very strict on pre-Islamic history. This book preserves it still to this day, and it's seen as a point of national pride. If you go to cafes in Iran today, you will see people telling stories from this book, reenacted them, and their stories lives on. And that was the main purpose of Ferdowsi too, to keep the story of pre-Islamic Persia alive, keep the story of the heroes and the kings, both good and bad, alive. And this book achieved that. It immortalizes the character, the kings. So even though Ferdowsi shows that civilizations rise and fall, heroes rise and fall, the story lives together and it's still very relevant. If I'm going to give a final conclusion, is that Ferdowsi is saying that time destroys all civilizations, it destroys all heroes, it destroys all kings, but storytelling keeps them alive. Storytelling keeps Persia alive, it keeps Persian culture alive, it keeps Persian identity alive, it keeps the story of all the different characters alive. Trying to say that memory refuses to disappear. And that's why it's important that you read this book, because then you will become a part of the people that keeps the story alive. Now, thank you for watching this video all the way through. Please don't forget to click on the like button if you like this video. Leave a comment and let us think what you think of the book, if you think it's interesting. Write if you think there's any book we should read and review. And of course, please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.